The Empire feared one thing more than war: a queen in love. The words existed only as a forbidden joke whispered in places where palace walls could not listen. Yet on the highest level of the celestial palace, beneath a dome of living crystal and silver light, the joke was closer to the truth than anyone dared imagine. Queen Seraphina sat upon the star throne while thousands of floating lights drifted above the royal chamber like silent constellations. Her deep teal skin shimmered beneath the glow of the throne room. Silver hair rested across her shoulders like flowing moonlight. Around her, members of the Imperial Council argued over trade routes, border disputes, and succession laws. Their voices rose and fell beneath the vast ceiling. Seraphina heard every word. She listened to none of them. Her attention drifted toward the enormous window beyond the chamber. Far beyond the crystal walls, stars burned across the darkness. Somewhere inside that endless sea of light existed the only place where she felt truly free. "Your Majesty?" one counselor asked. Seraphina blinked and returned her attention to the meeting. "Continue." The counselor bowed and resumed speaking. More statistics, more projections, more political concerns. Everything expected from a ruler of the largest empire in known space. Everything except the secret hidden at the center of her life. No one in the chamber knew it. No one in the empire suspected it. Not even her closest advisors. For 8 years, Queen Seraphina had protected a truth capable of shaking the foundations of the throne itself. The meeting continued for another hour before finally ending. Counselors departed in groups. Guards resumed their positions. Palace attendants quietly gathered documents and holographic records. Seraphina remained seated until the last footsteps faded into silence. Only then did she stand. The queen crossed a private corridor illuminated by soft blue light. Ancient royal portraits watched from the walls. Generations of rulers. Generations of tradition. Generations of expectations. She passed them all without slowing. Hidden elevators carried her deeper into the palace. Far below the royal chambers. Far below the government halls. Far below the areas marked on official maps. Few people knew this section existed. Even fewer possessed access authorization. The doors opened. Warm light spilled into the corridor beyond. The atmosphere immediately changed. The cold perfection of the palace vanished. In its place came something simpler. More human. Books rested on shelves. Small plants grew beside windows. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Seraphina smiled before she even entered the room. Ethan Carter stood near a kitchen counter preparing 2 mugs. The human looked up and smiled when he saw her. The expression erased an entire day of political exhaustion. "Long meeting?" he asked. "Long empire," she replied. Ethan laughed softly. The sound filled the room. Seraphina realized once again why she kept risking everything for this hidden life. Here she was not a queen. Here he was not an impossible secret. Here they were simply 2 people sharing the same quiet evening beneath the stars. Outside the palace, an empire slept peacefully. Inside its heart, the greatest secret in the galaxy sat beside a human man holding 2 cups of coffee. And neither of them noticed the tiny shadow watching from the doorway at the end of the hall. The small shadow disappeared before either of them noticed. A moment later, tiny footsteps echoed down the corridor. Ethan smiled immediately. He recognized the sound. 3 seconds, he said. Seraphina looked up from her coffee. What happens in 3 seconds? Ethan raised one finger. 1. Soft footsteps approached. 2. A quiet giggle drifted through the hallway. Seraphina smiled despite herself. 3. A young girl burst into the room carrying a stack of books nearly as tall as her chest. The books slipped sideways. Ethan barely managed to catch them before they crashed onto the floor. "Easy there, Ava." The girl laughed. "I almost had it." Her golden eyes sparkled beneath the warm lights of the hidden residence. Silver hair framed her face. Her deep teal skin matched her mother's, but there was something unmistakably different about her. Something neither entirely human nor entirely imperial. Ava looked up at Seraphina. "Did you finish ruling the galaxy?" Seraphina laughed softly. "For today." "Good." Ava climbed onto a chair beside the table. "Because I need help with astronomy." Ethan glanced at the stack of books. "That is astronomy and stellar physics. At your age?" Ava shrugged. "The stars are interesting." Ethan exchanged a look with Seraphina. Neither needed words. Their daughter constantly surprised them. Ava opened one of the books. A projection emerged above the pages. Hundreds of glowing stars appeared across the air, the room filled with floating constellations. Ava pointed toward one cluster. Why do people call this region the frontier? Ethan leaned back in his chair. Because long ago, nobody knew what was out there. But now we do. Mostly. Ava considered that answer carefully. She always did. So why are people still afraid of it? Ethan paused. The question sounded simple. It was not. Before he could answer, Serafina spoke. Because knowing a place and understanding a place are different things. Ava looked thoughtful. Like people. Exactly like people, Serafina replied. For a moment the room grew quiet. Only the soft glow of projected stars illuminated the walls. Outside the hidden residence, an empire measured success through fleets, wealth, and power. Inside this room, success looked very different. It looked like shared meals. Questions about the universe. A child learning who she wanted to become. Ava stared at the floating stars. Can I ever go see them? The question landed softly. Yet both adults felt its weight immediately. Ethan lowered his eyes. Serafina's smile faded slightly. Ava noticed. She always noticed. I asked something wrong again. No, Ethan said gently. You did not. Ava looked between them. Then why does everyone become quiet when I ask that? The room fell still. Serafina reached across the table and touched her daughter's hand. Because we want to protect you. Ava frowned. From what? Neither answered immediately. The hidden residence suddenly felt smaller. Beyond its walls existed a civilization that would celebrate its queen, honor its traditions, and reject the truth about the child sitting at this table. Ava looked down at the glowing stars floating above her book. Sometimes I think I am the secret. Ethan's heart tightened. Serafina's expression softened. Ava was too young to understand politics. Too young to understand fear. Yet she understood enough. Ethan moved beside her chair. You are not a secret. Ava looked up. Then what am I? Ethan smiled. A real smile. Warm and steady. You are the best thing that ever happened to us. Ava smiled back. The answer seemed enough for now. But as the stars continued glowing above the table, neither parent noticed the faint shimmer of light gathering around their daughter's fingertips for the very first time. The shimmer vanished before anyone noticed it. The tiny sparks dissolved into the air like dust caught in sunlight. Ava continued studying her astronomy projection, while Ethan and Serafina exchanged a brief glance. Neither of them sensed what had happened. Yet something inside the room felt different. Not dangerous. Different. The following morning arrived beneath a sky of pale violet clouds drifting above the imperial capital. Hidden deep inside the private gardens beneath the palace, Ava sat cross-legged beside a small pond surrounded by silver-leaf trees. Sunlight filtered through crystal branches overhead. Tiny creatures moved between flowers glowing with natural bioluminescence. It was one of the few places where she was allowed to roam freely. Ethan sat nearby reading from an old paper book. Not a hologram. Not a projection. An actual book. Ava always liked those best. She claimed they smelled like stories. Serafina had already returned to royal duties hours earlier. Somewhere above them, council meetings and diplomatic discussions filled another busy day. Down here, life moved more slowly. Ava watched a small winged creature struggle near the edge of the pond. One delicate wing appeared trapped beneath a fallen branch. The tiny animal chirped softly. Ethan looked up from his book. Before he could stand, Ava was already moving. Careful, he said. Ava nodded and knelt beside the creature. Her golden eyes narrowed with concern. It is scared. Ethan approached quietly. Most creatures are when they get stuck. Ava reached toward the branch. The animal trembled. I will not hurt you. Her voice softened. The tiny creature seemed to relax slightly. Ava carefully lifted the branch. The wing remained pinned. She frowned. Come on. The animal chirped again. Ethan watched silently. Ava had inherited many things from both parents. Her curiosity came from him. Her determination came from Serafina. Her compassion belonged entirely to herself. You are okay, she whispered. Then it happened. A faint glow appeared around her hand. Ethan froze. Soft threads of golden light flowed between Ava's fingers. The energy felt warm rather than bright, gentle rather than overwhelming. The trapped creature suddenly relaxed completely. Its breathing slowed. The damaged wing straightened. Ava blinked. Dad. Ethan stared. The light continued growing. Golden patterns spread across the grass. Tiny flowers nearby opened their petals. Leaves shimmered as though responding to an invisible breeze. The injured creature stretched its wing and lifted effortlessly into the air. It circled Ava once before disappearing into the trees. Silence followed. Ava looked down at her hands. The glow slowly faded. Did you see that? Ethan's heart pounded. He forced himself to remain calm. I saw it. Ava looked worried. Did I do something wrong? Ethan immediately knelt beside her. No. He smiled gently. No, sweetheart. Yet concern lingered behind his eyes. High above the gardens, hidden inside the palace infrastructure, thousands of monitoring systems constantly scanned for unusual energy signatures. Most ignored the lower residential sectors entirely. Most. In a secure monitoring chamber 3 miles away, a dormant sensor suddenly activated. One technician frowned at his display. A brief energy spike had appeared and disappeared almost instantly. The reading lasted less than 2 seconds. Too short to trigger an alert. Too unusual to ignore completely. The technician saved the report for later review. Meanwhile, in the hidden garden, Ava leaned against Ethan's shoulder and watched butterflies drift through the silver trees. She smiled. The moment already felt distant to her. Children moved on quickly. Parents did not. Ethan looked toward the palace towering above them. For the first time in years, a quiet fear settled into his chest. Because somewhere inside the Empire's endless systems, the secret they had protected for so long had just left its first trace. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 8. Nothing happened. No alarms. No investigations. No unexpected visitors arriving at the hidden residence. Ethan told himself he had worried for nothing. The sensor reading had probably vanished among millions of routine system logs. The Empire generated enough data every hour to bury a small anomaly forever. Yet the feeling remained. A quiet unease sitting somewhere beneath his thoughts. Ava, meanwhile, seemed completely unaffected. She spent her mornings studying. Her afternoons exploring the private gardens. Her evenings listening to stories while Serafina escaped the pressures of the throne for a few precious hours. Life continued, almost normally. One evening, warm light filled the hidden residence while rain tapped softly against crystal windows. Ava sat on the floor surrounded by books and scattered sketches of star systems. Ethan prepared dinner nearby. Serafina arrived later than usual. The exhaustion on her face was impossible to miss. She removed her ceremonial crown and placed it carefully on a nearby shelf. Immediately, she seemed less like a ruler and more like herself. Ava noticed first. Bad day. Serafina smiled faintly. Political day. Ava nodded as if that explained everything. Somehow it did. The queen sat beside her daughter and looked through the sketches. Hundreds of stars. Nebulous. Exploration routes. Entire imaginary civilizations. Ava pointed toward one drawing. That world welcomes everybody. Serafina studied the image. Everybody. Everybody. Ava smiled. Nobody has to hide there. The room grew quiet. Ethan stopped stirring the pot on the stove. Serafina looked at her daughter for several seconds. Ava did not seem sad. She simply stated the idea as though describing weather. That somehow made it harder to hear. Serafina touched the edge of the drawing. It looks beautiful. Ava smiled proudly. Then something moved outside the window. A small animal stood beneath the rain. One of the palace garden creatures. Tiny. Delicate. Its silver fur glistened beneath the falling water. Ava immediately stood. I forgot to feed him. Ethan laughed. You named him? Of course. Ava grabbed a container of fruit slices and hurried outside. Ethan moved toward the window. Serafina joined him. Together they watched their daughter crossing the garden path beneath the rain. Soft lights illuminated the silver trees. Water shimmered across stone walkways. Ava knelt beside the tiny creature and offered it food. The animal approached cautiously. Then something unexpected happened. The rain stopped. Not everywhere. Only around Ava. Ethan frowned. Serafina straightened immediately. Droplets continued falling across the garden. Yet a perfect circle of dry air surrounded their daughter. Tiny particles of golden light drifted around her like floating stars. The creature seemed completely unafraid. It climbed into Ava's lap. She laughed. The golden particles brightened. Flowers nearby slowly opened despite the evening hour. Silver leaves shimmered. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Serafina's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Ancient recognition. That cannot be possible, she whispered. Ethan looked at her. What? Serafina never answered. Her eyes remained fixed on Ava, on the golden light, on the impossible phenomenon unfolding beneath the rain. Somewhere inside the deepest records of the royal bloodline existed stories almost nobody remembered anymore. Stories older than the empire itself. Stories describing children capable of awakening gifts that appeared only once in many generations. Outside, Ava continued laughing with the tiny creature in her arms. She had no idea anything unusual was happening. But high above the palace, hidden inside a network of imperial monitoring satellites, the same energy signature appeared again. This time it lasted 12 full seconds. And this time the system did not ignore it. The alert reached the palace at sunrise. Not through alarms. Not through emergency channels. Through a quiet report delivered to the Queen's private intelligence office. Most rulers would never have noticed it among thousands of daily documents. Serafina noticed immediately. She sat alone inside a small chamber overlooking the eastern gardens while pale gold sunlight spread across the capital city below. The report hovered above her desk. 3 lines. 1 energy anomaly. 1 location. 1 timestamp. Her eyes closed briefly. The second reading. Exactly where she feared it would be. The hidden gardens. Ava. A soft knock echoed through the chamber. Enter. Ethan stepped inside. One glance at her expression told him everything. Another one? Serafina nodded. Ethan moved closer. The report reflected across his face. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside the window, hundreds of airships crossed the morning sky. Citizens began another ordinary day. Somewhere among them existed millions of people who adored their queen. Millions who trusted the empire's traditions. Millions who would not understand the truth hidden beneath the palace. Ethan finally exhaled. How bad? Serafina enlarged the report. The monitoring satellites classified the energy pattern as unknown. Ethan frowned. Unknown sounds good. Not for long. Serafina stood and crossed toward the window. The Empire investigates unknown things. Silence followed. Neither needed to discuss the obvious implications. If investigators discovered the source, questions would follow. Questions about Ava. Questions about lineage. Questions about the human living beneath the palace. Questions neither of them could answer publicly. Hours later, the Imperial Council assembled. The grand chamber shimmered beneath floating lights and towering crystal pillars. Serafina resumed her place upon the star throne. Councilors debated economic forecasts, diplomatic negotiations, and fleet deployments. Then the conversation shifted. Your Majesty, one elder councilor began. There remains the matter of succession. Serafina felt her heartbeat slow. Not faster. Slower. The subject had finally arrived. Several council members exchanged glances. The elder continued. The empire prospers. Stability remains strong. Yet uncertainty regarding the future creates unnecessary concern. Another councilor nodded. The people deserve clarity regarding an heir. Serafina listened without interruption. She had heard variations of this discussion for years. Today felt different. The pressure had become coordinated, deliberate. One council member projected population confidence metrics. Another referenced historical precedents. A third discussed continuity of governance. None of them mentioned the real issue. Every person in the room expected the queen to select a noble consort and produce a publicly recognized heir. Every person assumed such a future remained possible. None of them knew it had already happened. Far below the palace, Ava sat beside a fountain teaching the silver-furred garden creature how to balance on a stone ledge. Ethan watched from nearby. He smiled despite the weight pressing against his thoughts. Ava laughed when the animal slipped harmlessly into the grass. The sound echoed through the garden. Bright, innocent, completely unaware of politics. Completely unaware that powerful people were discussing her future without realizing she existed. Back inside the council chamber, pressure continued mounting. The empire requires certainty, one advisor said. Serafina remained composed. Yet beneath the calm surface, fear slowly tightened around her heart. Not fear for herself. Fear for the child hidden beneath the same palace where these discussions took place. Then another report silently arrived within her private interface. The intelligence office had completed its review. Additional sensors were now tracking the unidentified energy source. Serafina read the notification without changing expression. But inside, everything shifted. The search had officially begun, and somewhere beneath the palace, a young girl continued laughing beside a fountain while the future of an empire quietly moved toward her. The search remained invisible. That was what frightened Serafina the most. No investigators appeared at the palace gates. No official inquiries arrived from intelligence agencies. No warnings were issued. The empire simply watched. Quietly, patiently, looking for a pattern it did not yet understand. A week later, sunlight streamed through the crystal roof of the hidden gardens. Ava sat beneath a silver tree, sketching imaginary spacecraft into a notebook. Ethan worked nearby, repairing a small fountain pump that had stopped functioning. The moment felt peaceful, almost ordinary. Then a frightened cry echoed through the garden. Ava immediately looked up. A small creature darted from the bushes. One of the silver-furred animals she loved. Its tiny leg had become tangled in decorative vines growing along a stone wall. The creature struggled. Ethan set down his tools. "Easy," he called. Ava was already running. "I got it." She knelt beside the frightened animal. The creature trembled. Its breathing came fast and shallow. Ava reached toward the tangled vines. "It is okay." The words sounded familiar. Ethan remembered hearing the same gentle tone weeks earlier beside the pond. He froze. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Ava carefully touched the trapped creature. Golden light appeared instantly. Not faint this time. Not subtle. The glow flowed through her hands like liquid sunlight. The vines loosened. Flowers surrounding the wall bloomed simultaneously. Silver leaves shimmered across nearby branches. The frightened animal relaxed immediately. Ethan stared. The phenomenon lasted longer than ever before. Nearly 15 seconds. Ava blinked in surprise. "Dad." The golden light drifted upward into the air. Tiny luminous particles floated between the trees. The entire garden seemed alive with soft radiance. Ethan hurried forward. "Ava, are you all right?" She looked down at her hands. "I think so." Then another voice spoke from behind them. "Remarkable." Ethan spun around. Serafina stood at the edge of the garden path. She had arrived moments earlier without either of them noticing. Her expression held both wonder and concern. Ava looked nervous. "Mom, I did not mean to." Serafina immediately crossed the distance between them and knelt beside her daughter. "You did nothing wrong." She touched Ava's cheek gently. Yet Ethan could see the worry hidden behind her eyes. The golden particles finally faded. Silence returned. Birds resumed singing among the silver trees. The moment seemed over. Except it was not. Miles above the palace, 3 orbital monitoring satellites activated simultaneously. Energy readings surged across their systems. Automated protocols classified the event as significant. This time the anomaly lasted long enough for deeper analysis. Long enough for pattern recognition algorithms to compare data. Long enough for ancient records buried inside imperial archives to awaken. Deep inside the palace intelligence network, a dormant historical reference suddenly appeared. Royal bloodline energy signature match probability, 97%. Analysts immediately flagged the result for review. Meanwhile, in the hidden garden, Serafina and Ethan sat with Ava beneath the silver tree. The young girl rested her head against her mother's shoulder. "Am I strange?" she asked quietly. Serafina smiled sadly. "No." Ava looked up. "Then what am I?" For a moment neither parent answered. Sunlight filtered through the crystal canopy overhead. Golden reflections danced across the grass. Finally Ethan spoke. "You are something new." Ava considered that answer carefully. Then she smiled. To a child, that sounded wonderful. To her parents, it sounded terrifying. Because somewhere within the Empire's vast intelligence network, people were already beginning to ask the same question. And for the first time, the Empire was getting close to finding the answer. The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. 2 days after the latest energy event, the Imperial Council announced an extraordinary assembly. Every senior noble house would attend. Every sector governor would connect through HoloLink. Every major institution across the Empire would watch. Officially, the gathering concerned succession planning and long-term stability. Unofficially, Serafina understood exactly what it meant. The pressure had reached its peak. On the morning of the assembly, the palace felt different. Quieter. Even the air seemed heavier. Sunlight poured through towering crystal windows while thousands of attendants prepared the grand throne chamber. Ethan stood inside the hidden residence watching the distant palace spires through a window. Ava sat nearby, finishing a drawing of a starship. The silver-furred garden creature slept beside her chair. Everything looked normal. That somehow made the day feel even stranger. "Will you be gone long?" Ava asked. Serafina knelt beside her daughter. The royal robes she wore today seemed heavier than usual. "Just for a few hours." Ava nodded. Then she studied her mother's face. "You are worried." Serafina smiled gently. "Am I that obvious?" "Only to me." Ethan laughed softly. Serafina did too. For a moment the tension eased. Ava handed her mother a folded drawing. "For luck." Serafina opened it. 3 figures stood beneath a sky filled with stars. A human, an alien woman, a child holding both their hands. Above them, Ava had written a simple sentence. "Families belong together." Serafina swallowed hard. "Thank you." She kissed Ava's forehead before standing. As she left, she glanced once toward Ethan. No words were necessary. Both understood the uncertainty ahead. Hours later, the grand throne chamber shimmered with light. Hundreds of representatives filled the enormous hall. Floating platforms carried holographic delegates from distant systems. Crystal pillars stretched nearly 200 feet toward the vaulted ceiling. The Empire had gathered to watch its future unfold. Serafina sat upon the star throne. Calm on the outside, storm inside. One counselor after another delivered prepared statements. Economic forecasts, political recommendations, succession proposals. Everything moved exactly as expected. Then an elderly noble rose from his seat. "Your Majesty," he said, "the Empire respectfully requests clarity regarding the royal heir." The chamber fell silent. Thousands listened. Serafina knew this moment would come. She simply had not expected it today. Before she could respond, movement appeared near one of the side entrances. Small movement, almost invisible. A child-sized figure stepped into the corridor beyond the chamber doors. "Ava." Serafina's heart stopped. Ethan appeared seconds later behind her, clearly trying to catch up. Ava looked around with wide eyes. She had never seen the throne room before. Never seen the Empire gathered in one place. The massive chamber glowed with color and light. Crystal ceilings reflected entire galaxies above. Ava stood completely still. Wonder filled her expression. Several nearby attendants noticed her. Then council members noticed. Then governors. One by one, heads turned toward the unexpected child standing inside the most important room in the Empire. Ethan reached her at last. But it was already too late. Hundreds of eyes had found her. Serafina remained frozen upon the throne. Across the chamber, mother and daughter locked eyes. Neither spoke. Yet both understood something had changed. The secret that had survived for years was suddenly standing beneath the lights of the throne room for everyone to see. And all across the chamber, people began asking the same question. Who was the child standing before the queen as though she belonged there? The silence spread through the throne room like a wave. Hundreds of representatives stared toward the small figure standing near the entrance. Ava looked back at them with innocent curiosity. She had no understanding of protocol, no understanding of political consequences. To her, this was simply a beautiful room filled with fascinating people. Ethan stopped beside her, breathing slightly harder from hurrying through corridors he never intended her to enter. Around them, whispers began, quiet at first, then growing. Questions passed from one delegate to another. Who was she? Why was she here? Why had palace security allowed a child inside the Grand Assembly? Serafina remained seated upon the throne. Years of royal discipline kept her expression calm. Inside, her heart felt as though it might break apart. Ava smiled when she saw her mother. The simple gesture carried no fear, no shame, only trust. Then the unexpected happened. One of the floating holographic displays above the chamber flickered. Delegates glanced upward. A second display flickered beside it. Then a third. Tiny streams of golden light appeared between the suspended projectors. Soft, gentle, beautiful. The entire chamber looked up. Ava followed their gaze. "Oh." The word escaped before she could stop it. Golden particles drifted upward from her hands. Ethan immediately understood. Serafina did too. The energy had awakened again. Only this time there was nowhere to hide it. The golden light flowed through the chamber like living sunlight. Crystal pillars shimmered. Reflections danced across silver floors. Floating displays transformed into rivers of radiant color. Yet nothing felt threatening. Nothing felt destructive. The phenomenon carried warmth, wonder, peace. Delegates who had arrived expecting political debate now stood speechless beneath a ceiling filled with moving constellations of golden light. Ava stared at her hands. I did not mean to. Ethan knelt beside her immediately. It is all right. But the energy continued growing. Above the throne room, crystal arches illuminated one by one. Ancient patterns emerged from surfaces untouched for centuries. Symbols hidden within the architecture awakened beneath the golden glow. Several historians among the delegates gasped. They recognized the markings. Ancient royal symbols, older than the empire itself. Serafina slowly rose from the throne. No one noticed. Every eye remained fixed on Ava. The child stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by swirling light. Her silver hair shimmered. Golden eyes reflected countless stars dancing across the room. Then something extraordinary happened. The light touched people. Not physically, emotionally. Memories surfaced. Parents remembered children. Leaders remembered promises. Rivals remembered friendships long forgotten. The chamber grew silent in a completely different way. Not from shock, from understanding. Ethan looked around and saw tears in the eyes of delegates who moments earlier had been arguing about succession and power. No one spoke. No one wanted to break the moment. Ava simply stood there, confused by the attention. Why is everyone staring? She whispered. Serafina descended the steps of the throne. Slowly, deliberately. The golden light reflected across her face as she crossed the chamber. She stopped beside her daughter and gently placed a hand upon her shoulder. The energy immediately softened, not disappearing, settling, like sunlight finding calm water. Across the hall, an elderly counselor finally found his voice. His eyes remained fixed on the child. Your Majesty, the words trembled slightly. Who is she? The question echoed through the vast chamber. Thousands waited for the answer. Ethan stood beside Ava. Serafina stood beside both of them. For years they had hidden from this moment. For years they had protected a secret against an entire empire. Now the throne room glowed with the light of that secret. And for the first time, there was nowhere left to hide. The question lingered beneath the crystal ceiling. No one moved. No one looked away. Thousands of representatives waited while golden light drifted slowly through the throne room like living starlight. Ava stood between Ethan and Serafina, her small hand reaching instinctively for her mother's. The queen looked down at her daughter. Years of secrecy, years of fear, years spent protecting the people she loved. All of it had led to this moment. Serafina lifted her head and faced the assembly. She is my daughter. The words echoed across the chamber. Silence followed. Deep. Absolute. No one interrupted. No one challenged her. The statement settled over the room like a rising dawn. Ava looked up at her mother and smiled. To her, the answer seemed simple. It always had been. An elderly counselor slowly rose from his seat. Your daughter. Serafina nodded. Yes. Another representative glanced toward Ethan. Understanding spread through the room. Not through shock this time. Through realization. The final piece of the puzzle had appeared. Ethan felt hundreds of eyes turn toward him. For years he had lived as a shadow inside the palace. For years he had hidden behind closed doors and secret corridors. Now there was nowhere left to hide. Serafina extended her hand toward him. The gesture was small, yet it carried the weight of an empire. Ethan looked at her for a moment before taking her hand. The chamber remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. No outrage came. No accusations. No demands. Instead, people looked toward Ava. The child remained surrounded by faint golden light. Her expression held only curiosity, hope, kindness, the same qualities that had touched every person in the room moments earlier. One historian stepped forward. Tears glistened in her eyes. The ancient records were true. Several others nodded. The energy signature. The symbols awakened throughout the chamber. The forgotten stories hidden within royal archives. They all pointed toward the same conclusion. Ava was not a threat to tradition. She was part of it. Part of something even older than the empire itself. The elderly counselor looked at the child for a long time. Then he lowered his head. Not in surrender. In respect. The motion sent a ripple through the chamber. One by one, representatives followed. Governors, advisors, nobles, scholars, military leaders. Hundreds of people bowed their heads. Not before power. Not before a throne. Before a future they had never imagined. Ethan felt emotion rise in his chest. Beside him, Serafina closed her eyes briefly. The fear she had carried for years finally began to disappear. Ava blinked in confusion. Why is everyone doing that? Ethan smiled. Because they are listening. The child seemed satisfied with that answer. Soft laughter spread through the room. Gentle, warm, human, alien. It no longer mattered. The golden light slowly faded. Yet something remained. Not in the air. In the people themselves. The assembly ended hours later. No proclamations filled the sky. No celebrations erupted across the capital. Change arrived more quietly than that. Sometimes history moved through speeches. Sometimes through wars. Sometimes through a child standing in a throne room and reminding an entire civilization what truly mattered. That evening, the three of them stood beside a window overlooking the stars. Ava pressed her hands against the glass and pointed toward distant lights crossing the darkness. Ethan stood beside her. Serafina rested her hand in his. Beyond the palace stretched an endless galaxy filled with unknown worlds. For the first time, they faced it together without hiding. Ava smiled at the stars. Their reflections shimmered in her golden eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, the future looked less like an empire and more like a family.